Well, it's time for another rant. Hold on to your seats. More on the topic of postmodern deconstruction and the fact that you simply can't play a game unless you play by the game's rules. There's a principle, one that we use in teaching total quality, best developed by Dr. Duran, that speaks of the Pareto principle and how it applies mathematically to all outcomes. And here's how it works. 80% of the work is done by 20% of the people in an organization, in society. 80% of the wealth is owned by 20% of the people. And of that 20%, 80% of its wealth is owned by 20% of the 20%, and on ad infinitum. These are people that have learned to play the game by the rules. You can't be a chess master unless you play the game according to the rules of chess. One of the great things that postmodernism in its hideous manner has managed to do is deconstruct the literal foundation of the game that constrains a society that can be free. Here's an example. Free countries can only trade freely with other countries who are free. The rule of law that constrains the game of trade has to be played by all parties concerned. If a nation is trading with a totalitarian country and the game that it's playing is not constrained by the same set of rules, namely fairness in trade, and that the government is not injecting itself into every cloying aspect of human business affairs, then the game can't be played freely. This CCP virus that's come out of communist China and their grab for our supply chain has literally undermined economies all throughout the Western world, deconstructed the very foundation of functional economies, all because Tricky Dicky and Kissinger thought it'd be a good idea to create détente with China and assumed stupidly that by getting into bed with them, they would admire capitalism as the left calls free market individual economic liberty. I don't call it capitalism, it's laissez-faire liberty. They assumed that China would admire liberty so much that it would afford its people liberty. When presently in China, there is greater oppression than any other place on the planet other than perhaps North Korea, which, of course, labors under the same sort of government. The reason it doesn't work economically for Korea is that Korea doesn't have the benefit of pillaging and plundering Western economies to support itself, which is exactly what China is doing. Anywhere the Chinese go, they rape, pillage, and plunder their way through to success. There's not a patent that's safe in China. I know, I've been there. I traveled through the country back in 2009, was among the first group of round eyes to get into the Communist Party's economic development headquarters in Hefei, and saw what they're capable of. And I wondered at that time, and know, and utterly convinced now, that it was a huge mistake to grant them access to our supply chain. This inability to create a set of rules by which all can play by is causing Western culture to collapse. Why? Because our government and other governments, such as my wife's government, the Norwegian government, creates special status for certain people that they deem to be oppressed, so that when they come and immigrate, they're not playing by the same rules that a Norwegian or a Canadian have to play by. They're granted special status. And yet at the same time, our ruling elite have the unmitigated gall to say that we Canadians and Norwegians are inherently racist and bigoted if we happen to notice that people that fled to our shores, supposedly leaving oppression as their excuse to come, often are traveling back to their country of origin, which oppressed them, and own property over there and now have property here that our governments have helped them to obtain. The rule of law must apply to all equally. It is time that we wake up and understand that if we're creating a society where the same set of rules don't constrain the game so that we can all be free and all have the opportunity to apply ourselves to achieve, that the game can't be played at all. Norway has a saying, it's called "Alle skal med, all shall be with." Well, no, all won't be with. You know, when your ticker goes bum on you, you don't want to find the doctor that graduated at the bottom of the class and only got through heart surgery 101 because the government interfered in the process of him graduating. No, you want to find the surgeon that's the absolute best in their field. The same applies with sports. The same left-leaning, PBS-watching, pottery-making, pro-abortion, gay rights activists that are screaming inequality wouldn't watch a sports game if the one team wasn't better than the other, and that there was an opportunity for the team that was better to win, and that the game was constrained by playing by the rules, observed by referees to ensure they stayed within the rules of the game. I think the most remarkable thing about the postmodern left is their inability to apply the rules that govern themselves equally in all situations. What applies in one situation doesn't apply in another. They must live with so much cognitive dissonance in their head. It's the same about the damn lockdown. The WHO and all the top doctors in the land are contradicting one another constantly. Sweden hadn't had a lockdown, and that's shocking to me because, of course, Sweden is just about the most socialistic country you could possibly speak about. But in this regard, because the Swedes are so conformist in their nature, the government there chose not to lock them down, knowing people would just simply do what they're told and march in lockstep. Except, of course, the immigrants among them that still bomb, rape, and pillage and plunder places like Malmo. Hell no, I won't go Malmo. None of the things I'm saying are said out of prejudice, which means literally this: to judge beforehand. No, they are post-judice. I've observed these things happening, seen them with my own eyes, heard the stories from friends of mine. Let's take Max Hermanson, for example. Max graduated from Naval Academy in Bergen, just as my wife did. And after they were through with their gig, in the Coast Guard and the Navy, they got a gig doing something else. In Max's case, he went and taught school to what they call inwanderers. Max has a homosexual son. The punks in Max's class found out that he has a gay son and started calling for an honor killing of Max's son in his classroom. Max said to them, "Dere kan ikke snakke sånn I klassen min." You cannot speak that way in my classroom. Those punks went and complained to the school, and you know what the school did? Typical in a neo-Marxist country. They fired Max. Yeah, they fired Max. Max had a lovely old dusty bookstore in Oslo, one I was going to help his kid organize, because, I teach workplace organization. Anyway, somebody, we don't know who, went to the store and covered it with swastikas and trashed the store. Max had to close his bookshop. Now, Max won a huge settlement out of court, which the former leader, founder of FRP, demanded to know why Max was awarded such an enormous settlement out of court. But they created the worst enemy they could have possibly created, because now Max, perhaps wrongly, blames Muslims instead of blaming who is really at fault, his goddamn government, and the retarded game of Allah skull made. You know what? I grew up at a time when excellence was supposed to come out on top. No one was put down by being more clever than. And the same bloody musicians whom I used to book, and I fully admit that the only reason I ever got to play with these guys is because I was booking the shows. I was a shitty player. Shitty. But I knew how to put bums in seats and make clubs, book shows, and create, shows that were fun and viable, and of course had a lot of girls coming, which brought the guys out, and the shows were successful. But I fully admit that the reason I got to play with the top musicians in the country, and some from the States as well, is that because I was booking the show. Amongst themselves, they admire talent above anything else. But the same rules that they're applied to the game that they play aren't applied to society. It's a stunning rejection of reason and logic, which lies at the very heart of postmodern ideology, that reason and logic itself is only indicative of the white male patriarchy that they constantly define as the source of all tyranny. I say, the source of all tyranny is this: the I know better than you thens. The ones who are willing to use the full force of the state and its police and military to make you do what you're not otherwise inclined to do. And that they're making you do things that in fact contradict English common law and the Constitution. They're actually forcing you to do things which, according to constitutional law and English common law, are illegal. Think about that. That lunatic Trudeau is now governing without a parliament, floated government propped up by the NDP. When they called for a non-confidence vote, the NDP propped up his government. And he's leading this nation into absolute ruin. I just went to the drugstore to pick up a few scripts. And there were a bunch of Muslim folks from the Middle East working in the pharmacy. There were bags and bags and bags of prescriptions stacked all around the pharmacy. Chap was in front of me trying to pick up his medicines, and she couldn't find them. And I said to the guy, these people couldn't manage a piss up in a brewery. To which he heartily agreed. And then I asked him, do you remember this happening when we were kids? He said, no. I said, do you remember limited constitutional government and the rule of law? He said, oh yeah, I remember that from school. And I said, well, guess what? We ain't got that no more. Folks are coming here that are working. You know what? If the wrong drug ends up at someone's house or they don't get their scripts on time, somebody can die. And I had received an SMS telling me to get my arse down there and pick up my scripts. When I got up to the wicket, 3 or 4 times I told them who I was, where I lived. And then she said, is your birthday April the 15th? Yes. Is it 1953? Uh-huh. I don't have it. You have this, but you do not have that. And we sent this, but it is. Then, okay, why did you send me an SMS? 3 or 4 times I had to ask her that. Let me see it. She looked at it. I only have the other one, not the other one you need the most. Thanks. Tell you what, you fax the doctor and let me know when they're in, okay? Oh. As they say in Norwegian, jeg har hada nok. I have had enough. I live in a brand new home, in a brand new neighborhood. We moved in December 2017. This entire neighborhood has been ghettoized. They're all turning their grudges into shisha parlors. They walk up and down the street constantly with a cell phone glued to their ear. I don't walk up and down the street with a cell phone glued to my ear. What the hell are these people doing talking at the top of their lungs in Arabic in the middle of the street? I don't give a shit where you come from. But here, we got rules. If you come to Canada, don't tell me you came here because you left oppression when you're going back home all the time. And don't come here and tell me how I'm supposed to live to accommodate you. There are meat land, as they say in Norway. This is my land. If you don't want to play by our rules, ut med dere. Ha det fint.